All right, welcome everyone. Thanks for being here with us to talk in this Betazone session about neurotechnology and how to shape the future and how to find the right balance to enable responsible innovation. I'm Nita Farahani. I'm a professor of law and philosophy at Duke University and the co-chair of the Global Futures Council on Neurotechnology.
Hello everyone, I'm Tom Oxley. I'm the founder of Synchron and co-chair of the Neurotechnology Council. So we're going to talk today about neurotechnology. So we're going to start with an overview of where the field's at right now. I'm going to start with the field of implantable neurotechnology, and then we'll move on to the field of consumer neurotechnology. So the field of implantable neurotechnology has been emerging over the past period of decades, actually, with demonstrations of implants that go into the brain that can be used to treat conditions of patients in need where the body is not able to react to the brain. It's now emerging into the commercial realm, and there's now several companies globally that are on the cusp of commercial products, which is built on the back of decades of research. So we're going to cover some of those today. I have a company called Synchron, and so I'll give you a little description of how our technology is working. So the technology is for people who have various conditions. This is a range of people that we've treated who have ALS or motor neuron disease. Our technology in particular is implanted into the brain through a blood vessel and then implanted adjacent to the motor cortex. This is a brain-computer interface technology. And we're now about to embark on our third clinical trial in the United States and Australia. And the concept with the technology is that for people whose brains are still active but their bodies are failing, such as what happens with motor neuron disease, you can deliver a technology into the brain which acts like a sensor, and the technology is able to record activity that is brought on by the intention to move. And the concept here is to but replace what has traditionally been a range of mechanisms that able-bodied people engage with technology. So in this case, we're sending information to make clicks or push a cursor around the screen that replaces what the hand would typically do. And we've had a collaboration with Apple, so we're sending in signals from the brain that take over what's called switch control in the Apple devices to enable people to control Apple systems without having to move their bodies or move their eyes. And so this is an example of some of our patients interacting with the system. There are various iterations of how the technology enter into the brain. There are some that require various types of surgery, and we're going to see a range of these applications come over the next several years, actually. There's now several companies in clinical trials. So this is on the backdrop. There's obviously one very famous company by a very famous entrepreneur who has now entered into this space, and I would say that's had a huge impact in the field, but I've been fundraising in this space for over 10 years now, and the growth in funding has been incredible, actually. So this is a primarily implantable neurotechnology into the billions now. Venture capitalists are now treating neurotech as a new hotbed of investment. It was 10 years ago, the brain was an area that was not invested in at all. So neuroscience has become a final frontier in medicine with a large amount of interest in the space, with this idea that it's addressing a condition or a range of conditions that have a huge unmet need. And so alongside the heart, the brain is the area of the body that causes the most amount of morbidity and mortality, with a huge amount of conditions that really have limited treatment availability. And the huge problem in this field has been the delivery of technology into the brain, and we're at a moment in time where engineering, material science, technology, AI are all converging, where we're now able to miniaturize systems and enable data transfer out of the brain that is enabling this technology. So it's a very exciting time. I'm a neurologist by training, and I started in medicine a little bit of time ago now, but the change in opinion of what can be done with the brain now it's very exciting in the field of medicine for brains. So that takes us over to consumer.
Yeah. And so I've been studying this field from a very different perspective for a couple of decades now, and interested in trying to see when will this really impact the vast majority of us, because most people will not in our lifetime have an implanted device. Most people will not need an implanted device, and the promise that implanted devices offer are extraordinary for those who are most in need, and we'll start to see those products come to the market in really exciting ways. But what about the rest of us? And is neurotechnology something that's going to impact us? And I've been following it because pretty early on, maybe more than a decade ago, there were instances where neurotechnology started to come into criminal courtrooms, where you started to see application of it for things like attempts at lie detection and using brain-based ways to try to interrogate a person's brain. And so from a legal and ethical perspective, I was curious about what the kinds of impacts would be for rights and for mental privacy and for freedom of thought. And it really wasn't until around 2018 that I saw a kind of major killer app, something that would make neurotechnology go more widespread for the rest of us. And that's at the moment in which I started to see companies with prototypes that were embedding brain sensors into everyday devices like a watch or a wristband or headphones or earbuds, turning multifunctional devices into devices that can also pick up on at least rudimentary brain activity. And initially, a lot of those were for purposes of things like meditation or to try to track focus or calm or stress levels, so basic brain states, tracking electroencephalography or EEG at a pretty, kind of, again, crude level because it's here on the surface of the scalp with a lot of potential interference. But what was really transformative that I saw starting then was the introduction of the possibility of neural interface technology for the rest of us. And this was along with the rise of spatial computing, augmented reality, virtual reality, where the traditional interface of working with those devices, like a mouse or a keyboard or a joystick, would become particularly cumbersome. And so if there was a different way possible, if it was possible to more seamlessly interact with those technologies, then big tech companies were quite interested in investing in them. And already we see now here in 2025 that there are products on the market like the one on the left, which has EEG sensors that are embedded into the soft cups around ears that enable people to use it for purposes of focus and attention, or the product on the right, which is a lot like the Meta Neural Band, which was launched on September 30th in the United States. This is the first major tech company play into widespread neural interface for the rest of us. And again, this is not at all signal-wise like implanted neurotechnology. It's picking up instead on peripheral nervous system activity, basically neurons as they travel from your brain down your arm to your wrist, and muscle activity, the electrical activity there, picking up through EMG, electromyography. But in the recent demonstration by Mark Zuckerberg, what he showed was the ability to do things like type with very minimal movement, or thinking about just basic finger flicking or switching in order to interact with their new augmented reality glasses. And that, I think, is where the more widespread likelihood of affecting the rest of us is, and where you have convergence between the implanted world and the consumer wearable world. Very different purposes in different markets, sharing the broad umbrella term of neurotechnology. The challenge in this space is that in many ways it's a brand new frontier. Even though there's been research into this area for really decades and neuroscience has been around for a very long time, if you think about against the backdrop of social media, of a world of surveillance capitalism, of a lot of mistrust around misuse of technology and data, what you see is that there are quite a few people, even neurotechnology experts, who express some concerns about trust and mistrust within the space, and whether or not consumers will be comfortable adopting technology that could be extraordinarily promising for health and wellness, but also could present novel risks with respect to the capabilities of decoding mental states, even being able to decode intentionally communicated speech from some individuals in certain circumstances. And so the question in that world where in many ways it's been described as the last frontier of privacy, that is mental privacy, what is at risk? And what's at risk here is, the challenge to kind of profound concepts of freedom of thought and profound concepts of self-determination over brain and mental experiences. What's at risk as well, though, is that mistrust of an entire category of technology could prevent adoption and advancement in a field that could be transformative for human health and well-being and for human flourishing. Noticing just the sheer number of people who are suffering from neurological disease and suffering, if this is a field that has early missteps, if there is significant rejection of the technology writ large, it'll be very difficult to make true advancements in brain health and wellness, which is one of the most unmet areas of need within humanity. And so how do you try to do the kind of most important thing, which is how do you build trust in an area that has novel risks? How do you build trust in a space that is so sensitive for people, that they identify so closely with their sense of self, with their sense of well-being, and with their own identity? And how do you find the right balance between trying to put into place the right metrics, the right strategies, the right laws, the right approaches to encourage and to incentivize responsible innovation while not stifling innovation, while not overburdening technology in ways that prevent it from ever coming to market? Already, quite differently from other fields and other areas of technological development, there are some laws that have been adopted across the world in the space of uniquely targeting neurotechnology and uniquely targeting neural data. And they vary in their approach. Some of them treat them as sensitive categories of data. Some of them adopt high-level principles. There are principles that have been adopted by major international organizations like UNESCO and the OECD. And the question is there space for practical tools that can really drive innovation, that rather than simply being the kind of sticks which can in many ways early on stifle innovation, are there carrots, are there practical tools that can enable and incentivize responsible innovation? Particularly in a moment where what we see is that in adjacent fields that are converging with neurotechnology and driving significant advances forward, that is artificial intelligence, that there's been a loss of the lead. That is, we're seeing rather than trust increasing as the technology proliferates, that the trust is eroding over time as well. And that's at a time in society when trust writ large is starting to erode. People have less trust in epistemic institutions, less trust in academic institutions, in the media, in scientific sources. So what do you do and how do you advance a field that has so much promise, but also such inherent risks in its novelty and in its sensitivity in the area in which it targets? And so that is why in our Global Future Council of the neurotechnology, we've been focused on trying to identify a way to build trust within the space through practical tools. And borrowing from concepts that are like a Nutri-Score that help give people transparency, we've started with an empirical analysis of what are the drivers of mistrust within the space of neurotechnology. We found that there are really 4 categories along which those tend to align. Those are questions about the device functionality, like what are the benefits that you can realize from it and what are the risks? If you're able to interact more easily with your technology, what do you have to give up in order to do so? Or do you have to give up anything in order to do so? If you have a data privacy policy, the second big category, what is the data privacy policy? Is neural data treated the same as website data, for example? Or is the data kept on the device? Are inferences kept on the device? These are kinds of questions that turn out to matter quite a bit to a lot of people who are looking into these new devices. Or what kinds of user-level controls are there? We see that across different kinds of technology, like parental controls, for example, in social media or devices, that those tend to empower people to make more individual-based choices that align their uses of the technology with their preferences. Is it possible, for example, if you have earbuds in that have sensors that are tracking brain activity, and there are times when you just want to be listening to music, do you have the choice to turn off the sensors in the collection of data? These are kinds of questions that giving people empowerment and choices over tend to matter. And then finally, what are the commitments that companies make to the individual over the long term? If that's implanted neurotechnology, what kinds of opportunities are there for people to continue to know that they will have their products serviced over time? So within those questions and within those studies, what we've started to develop is essentially an index, a kind of transparency card, which could attach to every product that comes out in the market. And along these dimensions that matter for trust of individuals, be able to score each of the companies so that a company, when they are engaging in best practices, can show the world in a standardized format that other people can interpret and understand, something that's usable and interpretable by the end user, so that if they have strong privacy preferences, they can sort between the products and find the product that aligns with their strong privacy preferences. If they have strong preferences with respect to user-level controls, they can quickly sort and figure out which one does that. Allowing people to make more informed choices, but also encouraging companies to be more transparent about their practices to try to drive the trust which is necessary to foster a future that is one that really is about human flourishing, right? I mean, so Tom, what I hear from you and from every other founder in this space is that this is where you're focused. You're focused on a future where children are able to look forward to a future of flourishing, where adults who have lost self-determination are able to reclaim that self-determination. How do you see trust playing into that in order to enable that?
So there's this dichotomy between, in medicine, how we think the technology can help people, and then what you find on cultural explorations of the dystopic future where this goes. And we just saw, I think it was the 70% people have concerns, but you ask those same people, are you excited? And the answer is also yes. So there's this interesting combination of this technology has great potential, and well, it can also go in this different direction, such as any tool that is new that enables you to do things that you couldn't do before, extend self-determination, extend human autonomy. Yeah, there are going to be risks, but if we get it right, there's this ability to further improve what you can do as a human. So it does come down to a very human, expressive tool. But yeah, I mean, the Meta band is interesting. We were just talking, and we've been talking in the council today in our neurotechnology group about the difference between the data itself versus what you do with the data. Mm-hmm. And so the Meta band is an EMG which does collect data which represents your movements of your hand, which represents your intention. But you would do that with the mouse as well. It's just that the mouse products don't grab your data. They don't track what your hand is doing. And so now there's obviously been loss of trust in the way that data has been used with third parties in the social media realm. So the obvious question with neurotechnology is, okay, how are you going to use the brain data? What does it mean? What does it mean about me? And how is that going to be used with third parties? And shout out to Meta, who have publicly said they're not going to move the data. It's going to be kept locally. And I think that's an example of a transparent policy that people want to know about. And so that's part of the idea with the trust index.
Isn't it interesting, though, right? So just to underscore what you just said, the neural bands for Meta, which is just launched, they, for now, say that all of the raw data that is collected is kept on device, that the only thing that ever leaves the device will be inferences, and that they don't plan to use that data. Now, of course, that could change tomorrow. They could update their terms of service and publish a different policy. But it's not the policy they've adopted with respect to other data, right? This is, I believe, and I could be wrong about this, but I believe it's the first time that they have very intentionally said, we're going to keep this kind of data on device because we recognize that it is sensitive data for the user. Does that strike you as surprising, given kind of, most of Meta's model has been about being able to use data for purposes of, like their business model has been to use data in order to inform advertisement and customize advertisement to individual users?
It's different, and you're certainly asking questions given the history, but they seem to be taking those steps because they're aware that they're trying to build trust, I think, with that approach. And so we're seeing in the field right now a well-intentioned push by some groups to try to provision or keep control of data, or not allow data to be transferred as a blanket rule, which is, you can see why you'd want to do that, but if you do that, you then block innovation in the field. So this was somewhat addressed with the genetics revolution, where there's some lessons to be learned for how genetic data was treated. But companies will not be able to build products to help people if they have very restrictive conditions over how the data is treated. So it's a very nuanced space, and to get it right, we don't know what right looks like yet.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's, I think, the real challenge, is just how do you strike the balance? Within the world of genetics, the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act in the United States was passed largely to enable sharing. The idea wasn't to try to lock down data. It was trying to recognize the particular areas that people were most worried about for misuse, to put into place protections against those misuse so that there could be research and medical-based sharing of genetic data in order to enable us to gain insights for medical and other health-based breakthroughs. And I think that's one of the questions that this field is really struggling with now, is how do you respect mental privacy of individuals and safeguard against misuse and harm that could come from having access to such sensitive data, while still being able to gain the insights to address the unmet needs of people who are suffering from neurological disease, from which we could learn so much about real-world data. Well, I know you all must have questions about some of what we have put here on the table, and we want to make sure that there's time for you to engage and ask questions about this. This is meant to be an introduction, but a conversation about, are there ways to use practical tools in society to foster trust, particularly in areas of emerging technologies? And what do you think about an approach like this one that would create transparency and opportunities for users to know more about the products along dimensions like data privacy and user-level controls and device functionality and commitments that the company has made to long-term data? Are there other areas that you would want to know about before using a neurotechnology device? So turning it to the audience for questions. And I'm not sure if somebody is running a mic back there. Okay, somebody will be running a mic, so simply raise your hand if you have a question, and if not, Tom and I are just going to keep talking because we love to talk with each other. Yeah.
Maybe for you.
Okay.
With regard to a trust index, how do you think it could be most useful? What would a successful trust index look like in 5 to 10 years as we're trying to negotiate these challenges?
I think it would be first and foremost different for the implanted world than it would be for the consumer neurotechnology world. And I think it's important to even have a trust index that helps people start to understand there is a difference between those fields. A lot of times in the media, what you see is a lack of a distinction between them. And the risks are different, not just medically, but also because implanted neurotechnology is an incredibly highly regulated field, going through incredibly detailed testing and clinical validation and safety and efficacy testing that raises very different questions and has very different users who, or patients who are eligible to use those products. Consumer-based neurotechnology fits more into the wearable world that we've all become more accustomed to. So many people wear smart watches or smart rings. They're used to giving a vast amount of personal data and being able to collect metrics about their sleep or their temperature or their overall basic health and functioning. And for those people, I think brain metrics will become increasingly a common metric that they are also measuring. And for that category, I see a trust index being quite powerful, especially in the early days, And what I would say is success for 5 years from now is consumers, who are kind of deciding, wow, this seems exciting and there could be a lot of promise here, but I'm nervous about my risk to my mental privacy. I'm worried that this product is snake oil and it doesn't really do what it says it does. To have an objective third-party system that they could turn to and trust and be able to sort through the decisions that are presented to them, and to have that work effectively and reliably, right? So not only do they rely upon it, but they are satisfied as a result of the choices that they make. And so I would hope it would drive public conversation, that it would incentivize corporate innovation and responsibility along these dimensions, and that it could build trust through an informed public about what the best practices in many ways are to foster and respect their trust, and to have them have truly informed consent with respect to factors that drive their concerns.
So in the context, there's a range of ethical principles that are being adopted, a range of international bodies. Why do you think this is different to what's being taken on by international bodies, and what's the difference, and why is it needed right now?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it complements it. I don't think it replaces it, right? I think that there's an important role for soft law mechanisms to establish principles and guidelines. I think there's an important role for law, although as a lawyer, I would say sometimes we regulate too late and sometimes we regulate too early. And right now, some of the regulations may be too early in ways that have unintended consequences for innovation within the field. And so practical tools, especially with a nascent industry, can oftentimes both help give really concrete guidance to companies and really concrete information to regulators and really concrete information to consumers. I've worked a lot on the principles and the laws, and what I hear from a lot of very well-intentioned people within industry is they don't know how that translates into what they should be doing, meaning what their privacy policy should be, or what their product design should look like, or what their commitments with respect to on-device versus off-device for kind of use of the data should look like. And that's sometimes the gap between principles and practice, is that very well-intentioned companies may not have the practical guidance that they need to make the choices that they have to make today about product design that could enable ethical innovation. Looking back to you all to see if there are questions, noting that some of our council members are here and we have talked them out, so they may not have as many questions. Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this great discussion and this overview that you've provided, Nita and Tom. So I'm just thinking, so my name is Olivia Machabane and I'm coming from South Africa and I'm a neuroethics researcher there. And I'm thinking, having been involved in the UNESCO ad hoc expert group with you, Nita, I know that we also included considerations for indigenous people in that particular guide and recommendation draft. So I'm curious because I spoke to somebody here early on during lunch, and there's a faith and spirituality, I believe, future council, and I was very impressed to hear that their intention is to actually engage with the other councils and to see how faith and spirituality is not being considered. And I'm thinking, as we've been discussing, I wonder how we want to think about that, particularly since indigenous communities, we know there's a lot of mistrust in science and there's a lot of injustices that have happened. And so I wonder whether we could think a bit about how we engage with that particular council as we kind of try to develop something like this to ensure that it's relevant, and we include, they mentioned that they were meeting with indigenous elders, for example, here at this meeting. So that's just something that came to mind as you were speaking. So
yeah, it's a great question. So first, I think for any practical tool like this one to work, the inclusivity of the design is crucial, right? And that means not just talking to neurotechnology experts in developing it, but really including as many voices as possible, including indigenous voices, voices of faith, voices of different cultures, reaching out globally to ensure that there are representation of different views. And we've done some of that work to date. We're still relatively early in the council, right? We started in March, it's October now. And in that time, we've been able to focus on the expert side of the survey, which is to engage both our expert community as well as a broader external survey that was administered to experts, and to do a lot of data gathering of existing studies that have been done. In the next phase of our work together, part of that inclusivity of design, I think, is not just engaging with some of the other councils here, which have a terrific range of expertise, but also broadening it well beyond, to ensure that at the end of the day, this is a tool that is representative and speaks to the broadest possible set of stakeholders who would be interested in using it and informed by it. And with that, let me thank you all for coming and for your time with us today. We encourage feedback and engagement with this and other ideas for how we can ensure practical and responsible innovation in this space. Thank you.